years and years of this investment has now yielded what we think will be the next big trend in vape for this space.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of The Dime. I'm Brian Fields. With me, as always, is Kellen Finney. And this week, we got a very special guest, Nick Kovacevich, CCELL Corporate Relations Director. Nick, thanks for taking the time. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I appreciate you making me a very special guest. I'm honored to be here and excited to have this conversation.
Excited to dive in. Kellen, how are you doing?
Doing really well. Really look forward to talking to Nick, diving into the whole nuances of the vape pen industry. But I'm honestly just really grateful that we have another West Coaster. I think he's out there right now, super loyal to the West Coast. So I'm just grateful. How are you doing today, Brian?
Yeah, I'm stoked. I think there's like a lot of topics. And I think from a macro perspective, like before we hopped in, we were kind of diving into like the president, the tariffs, and understanding the impact from a supply chain standpoint that I'm excited to dive in. But I think the most important element when we're getting into all these is the capital markets. And given the background, it's really important to understand like where your loyalty lies. And obviously, East Coast, West Coast battle. One market tends to be more favorable to the others from a capital market standpoint. So, Nick, if you had a loyalty, East or West Coast, which one are you taking?
Hey, look, you guys have really split me here because my loyalty is on the West Coast. California is my state. I grew up here. I surf here. I love it. I never want to leave here. But the reality is, if you want to fund a business, you want to make it big time. You got to go pay homage to the Mecca of New York, right? That's where financial transactions get done. I love New York City. It's my favorite city. So please do not pit me against good and good or great and great because I love them both.
I love it. A very neutral, partisan answer. So, Nick, for our listeners unfamiliar with you, can you give a little background about yourself and how you found your way to cannabis?
Yeah. Look, I grew up in California, as I mentioned. I did go to school in the Midwest, played college basketball, found my way back to California and really had no idea about cannabis at all. Never was a consumer at that point in my life. I was, 22, 23. And I heard about medical cannabis and I didn't know anything about it. Of course, I went in, with all my doctor's records and my knee surgeries just to make sure the doctor was able to prescribe me this medicine. And obviously, the inside joke there for anyone who's done it in California is you really don't need much to get this medical card. So I got it, and I got it again. I started to learn and actually started to see, that this was a real medical product. It actually cured people. It helped people that were dealing with different neurological issues. I saw firsthand, could consume it and instantly sort of perform life better. So that was very eye-opening. And, I wanted to look for a way to participate in the cannabis industry without taking as much risk as a lot of people who were participating in the cannabis industry at this time. This was 2010. And that's when we came across the packaging as being an avenue and sort of the picks and shovels play, right? And the same is true for vape here today. And so my journey was essentially starting Kush Bottles, which was a packaging business. Selling certified child-resistant packaging and got onto what ultimately became, a nationwide trend. Almost every single state, when they fully legalized for adult use or even medical use, incorporated some sort of regulations around how the product is packaged. And that became very valuable to be sort of in the middle of that supply chain for operators. We got to deal with operators in every emerging state, and it was very exciting, kind of seeing each state, open up the different regulations, the different players, what the trends were. And, it was in 2014, 2015, but really it was 2016 when the vapes took off on the scene. And CCELL ended up coming in with the ceramic core, and that changed the game. And we were just getting into the vape business. We'd acquired a vape distribution company, and we saw the writing on the wall. We saw that the CCELL products were far superior. And so in late 2017, we were able to work an agreement to become a distributor. And this was while I was at Kush Bottles. And there was other distributors that are still distributing today. Kush Bottles ended up selling to Green Lane. And so Green Lane's still a distributor, but Jupiter and 3Win were kind of the original distributors, still very big in the CCELL distribution business, as well as Canna Brands out of Washington. And this whole network was built through these distributors to make CCELL the number one player. And, CCELL was selling, still is, hundreds of millions of units and all across all the different legal markets. And, now you've got the hemp market, which has changed since I was a distributor, but it was a lot of fun. And so I got to see firsthand build this out and work with my friends at CCELL, which at the time were mostly in China, because we were there boots on the ground here in the U.S. And so it's an honor for me now that I left after the company was sold to Green Lane. I took a little bit of time off to be able to rejoin CCELL and continue the mission of what, I feel like I was a part of from the beginning, making vaporization the cleanest, the safest it could possibly be, and the most mainstream in the industry. And that's where we're at today.
So for those who are unfamiliar about CCELL, just give us a high level overview just of the size of CCELL and kind of some of the industries it operates in, and then we can dive into some of the specifics.
Yeah. So what most people, they don't think, and we were talking pre-show, people don't think as much about kind of the underlying supply chain. They think more, obviously, the brand that's on there, which it makes sense, right? But for every brand, for every computer, there's chips that power that computer, right? For every vape brand, there's hardware that powers that vape brand, and you want the best. Before you wanted Intel chips, now you want NVIDIA chips, right? And so CCELL really is the best of the best. And it all started with the ceramic core, again, kind of moving the market to the ceramic core. Everybody adopted. That's now industry standard. But what's not known is that everybody really sources their own cores, whereas CCELL makes theirs in-house. So they source from other factories, third party. CCELL produces in-house. So I think when you think about the size of CCELL, think about a factory that's tens of thousands of employees, multiple factories, not just one. China, but other parts of Asia, Indonesia as well. Huge R&D budget, and of course, this is all possible because CCELL and the parent company Smoore is the largest producer of vape hardware, not only to cannabis, but also to the traditional nicotine industry, and working with big tobacco companies globally. And so supplying hardware around the world, complying with regulations that are much more stringent than what we're facing here in cannabis. And so having the infrastructure to support that on a global scale, having the R&D budget that's required to be a leader, innovator in that space, and then being able to sort of bring the fruits of that and apply it to what's still a relatively small market in legal U.S. cannabis, that's been a big differentiator and allowed CCELL to get the dominant market position that we've had since we launched the ceramic core back in 2016.
That ceramic core, did it come from like a lot of their R&D work in the vape industry, right? Essentially, because the two industries are just turning different chemicals from a liquid into a vapor that you can consume, right? And so like there's a lot of similarities, right, from nicotine to cannabis. And so did the ceramic core, was that something that they had been developing from a nicotine standpoint and then deploy it into cannabis? Or was it like, hey, cannabis requires like a little different touch, if you will?
Yeah, exactly. A little bit of both, right? The underlying technology was being utilized for the broader platform. And actually, Mark Scatterday, who was a friend of Smoore's from his nicotine days, he was back here in the U.S. in Arizona and saw this market emerging and actually had the idea of going back saying, okay, look, there's some vapes already on the market, and it's all being produced by sort of these fly-by-night different factories. And I happen to have a relationship with the leading factory on the nicotine side that has the very large infrastructure and technology, great cutting edge technology. So it was actually he was the impetus to kind of bring this to them, and they were able to work together to formulate this. So it was adopting some of the existing technology, but really applying it specifically for cannabis. And the key was having, in this case, Mark and his team, but somebody here in the US that knew the market, because it was an interesting dynamic. For a lot of years, it was, essentially R&D, production, everything, technology, all coming out of China, where you literally can't have any cannabis oil, right? You go to prison for the smallest amount, trying to perfect devices for these burgeoning markets here in Colorado and California, where oil is so plentiful everywhere, right? And so how do you do that? And that was a struggle, and that ultimately led to jump ahead a little bit to a major investment that CCELL made in Arizona in just a few years ago in a research facility called SDR. And that facility, CCELL's put in over $10 million. It's phenomenal. We actually do invite clients to tour that facility so they can kind of see the R&D infrastructure that we have here stateside, which is unparalleled. You won't find that with any other of the competition. To be honest, the competition doesn't even have their own factories. They just use various factories out over in Asia. So to have that here stateside and to have those experts, it's incredible. And it's, I think, key because we can touch cannabis here in Arizona and the US. And so to be formulating the products with the actual in substance is the ultimate, trump card, I guess, so to speak, right? From being able to, have to kind of do this overseas where you don't have the access.
It's a critical separator, right? And I can only imagine from like a budgetary standpoint, having an industry where you have diversification, where you have all the nicotine revenue that you can siphon off and put into R&D for new emerging markets, is a big separator, because one of the challenges here in cannabis is that with the headwinds going up and down, if your sales are down, you might not have the R&D in order to invest. You might not have the capital to invest in the R&D standpoint, which ends up hurting the cycle, which just continues to plague the industry. So take us through like the conversation, if you were part of that conversation of, hey, we need to invest capital stateside in order to work directly with the product, because I think that is a huge moment in the evolution of the company as a whole.
Yeah, exactly. You hit the nail on the head. I think it's this industry is so unique in that sense. It's a hyper growth industry, so much potential, right? We're just scratching the surface. Yet the companies, even the leaders in the space, don't have budget to make those long-term investments in R&D. And I was a company in the space. I ran a company that was publicly traded that was growing fast. And we were accessing good amounts of capital at one time. And, I wanted to, of course, have that long-term mindset of like, where's this going to be in 10 years and how do we make those investments? And unfortunately, the market shifted and stocks beat up, access to capital wasn't there. And I had to shift my mindset as a CEO to short-term thinking, to how do we get through, this year? How do we get through this quarter? What do we cut so that we can, make sure that we can sustain? And it was frustrating. Here you are, you have this generational opportunity to build a brand new industry from the ground up that's going to be massive. It's going to overtake alcohol, right? And you're like, nobody even wants to give me the ability to make those investments. And so that's why I kind of living through it myself. I really, really enjoy working with CCELL. The chairman and CEO of SMORE, Alan Chen, it starts at the top. This man is visionary. He's an incredible leader, and he has an incredible ability to think long term. And so I always take an opportunity to meet with him when I can, whether over in China or when he's here on his trips, just to be able to talk to him and kind of some of that rub off on, me in terms of how he thinks so long term. And it starts with investment in technology, right? Innovation. And so his mindset is no matter how much opportunity there is today, how much profit there is to make today, if we're not making those investments for tomorrow, and particularly 5, 10, 15 years down the road, eventually, we're gonna end up faltering as a company. And so he's building this company to be around for the long haul. And I just love to see that. You don't see that as much today in general, right? Because everybody's, traded publicly. They're measured on a more of a, short-term basis, quarterly earnings. And this is a company that has said, hey, look, we found a lot of success. We obviously have recognized a lot of value, but we're not going to operate based on what's going to move the needle here in the short term. We're going to keep our mind focused on where we want to be in the long term. And so that's great. And then, of course, having a budget, right? Being able to have highly profitable business on the global nicotine front that can allow for a 9-figure R&D budget, it's incredible. And, putting that to the right use as well. We see some huge companies like Apple, right? There hasn't been a lot of innovation out of Apple, even though it's a phenomenal company and, highly profitable. So you got to get it all, right? You have to have the resources, you have to have the mindset to make those investments. And then you've also got to get it right. You've got to bring some real innovation to the market that sticks. And that's why we're also so excited about some of the new stuff that we have going on and the 3.0 technology that we announced at MJ Biz, because we think years and years of this investment has now yielded what we think will be the next big trend in vape for this space.
You don't think AirPods are super innovative?
Hold on now. But Nick,
the new iPhones do have better cameras, right?
Hey, I heard.
By no means am I defending Apple's evolution from a hardware standpoint, but they do spend exorbitant amount on R&D. But a lot of those projects they've tried to bring to the finish line and realized it's just not there. So they have to be willing to invest in failures in order to figure out which one is the end result, which again, I think is part of the challenge of cannabis as a whole, is because a lot of companies don't have the capital to have 9 failures where that 10th one is the loon shot to send it to the next iteration.
Yeah. No, look, and the other thing, and certainly I'm not bagging on Apple, is a phenomenal company.
Tim does
and,
listen, so we don't want to kill him.
Yeah.
He's listening right now, for sure.
Friend of the pod.
The other challenge they have, which is a problem none of us will likely ever have, is, they could bring a product to market and it could be a multi-billion-dollar product like Apple TV, and it does not move the needle for them whatsoever, right? It's like
100%.
Apple TV, a couple $1 billion, like, doesn't matter. So they've got another problem. They if they bring something to market and they're going to invest in it, it has to actually move the needle for them. And for them, that means, hundreds of billions of dollars, right? Not a couple billion. So I looked at the problem one day, personally, but I'm sure you guys would as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I didn't mean to derail the conversation, but getting back to it, I did have a question. Why Arizona? When you guys were looking at deploying capital, right? I know that it's weird. We talked about, you mentioned chips earlier, right? Like NVIDIA is building a huge facility in Arizona. I don't know if there's some sort of tax benefit for Arizona. I know that there's legal cannabis there, of course, but I didn't know if there was another reason why you guys chose Arizona.
Yeah, I mentioned the sort of distribution partner network, right? 2 of the largest distribution partners, 3Wind and Jupiter, are based in the Phoenix area. And I think Arizona is pretty unique in that it is a very business-friendly state. It does have legal cannabis, and not just, legal cannabis like, Ohio. This is like a fairly developed, robust market. It's all the MSOs are there. So it's a good market for cannabis, and it's a good talent pool for the particular scientists and engineers that we need. Also, it's a good cost of living. Look, you go to LA, obviously ton of talent, but cost of living is very high. So I think it checks a lot of different boxes. And that was the rationale for making that investment.
From an investment side, is it what is most beneficial for the cannabis industry based on what CCELL thinks? Is it based on what our consumers think? Or is it more of like a loon shot chance of okay, if we can figure out this for tobacco, this could be beneficial for cannabis? What's the breakdown there?
Yeah, phenomenal question. And, it's great to be able to kind of dissect the different parts of that. So, of course, what is also unique, I think, in our cannabis industry, just being so new and emerging, is there isn't a lot of consumer data, and there's not companies that have budget to really go get that data. CCELL is committed to that and is always focused on the consumer. It's another thing I love is they're willing to make those investments to do, the different consumer studies and essentially have that be a big part of the driving force behind where they're going to make investments and where they're going to look to innovate. So that's number one. Number two, of course, is, an interesting situation where CCELL is, again, that sort of behind the scenes provider of hardware to power the brand. So we have the brands saying, hey, here's where we think we want to go, or here's where we think the market's going to go. So, of course, being able to utilize the brands. And if the brands want to invest in specific types of form factors or specific types of technology based on, what types of different products they want to bring to market or different oil consistencies that they're going to be investing in, that's a key data point that we want to bring into the fold as well. But the third thing that you mentioned is the relationship that we have with the nicotine side of the business. And so this is a good example of, something that took off globally that's a massive market is the heat not burn technology. S'more was able to announce new technology that is proprietary that's now being rolled out with the partner. I think it's BAT, right? And that's going extremely well. And we have that kind of sitting there for cannabis. Is cannabis ready for that? No, not right now, right? And so that's another good component is we've got to look at where the market is today, what the consumers want, what the brands want. And then also in the back of our mind, think about some of these things that could be game changers down the road. And if they're trending, in global markets like Europe in that direction, there could be a time where that fits really well, or it's a modification of that technology that could be a better fit for the cannabis industry. So yeah, we got to use all those different data points. And again, that goes to the point of, if you're going to spend this type of investment, there has to be a return at some point. And you're going to have some things that don't pan out. And maybe there's technology that could be used on one side of the business or the other that maybe doesn't transfer. But I'm sure there's going to be some things that are relevant for both sides. And given the scale that we have on the nicotine side, that could allow us to provide products to cannabis industry at a much cheaper price point than otherwise folks could do just focused on this industry.
What about the balance between like the brands of like the oil and the hardware? Just from a consumer standpoint, sometimes it can be confusing if you have an off-putting experience, like which one to blame. So when you're having these conversations with the MSOs or big brands, like how do you establish the relationship on like who influences what or who makes those decisions? Because again, like it's kind of like a unison package, but eventually like one of them has to be responsible for the outcome.
Exactly. And that's why, look, I was in the vape distribution business back in 2017 when some of this technology was, new technology was coming out all over the place and none of it was proven. And we had just massive failures. I mean, just the worst thing you can possibly go through is getting calls from customers who's filled tens of thousands of these products with oil that's pretty expensive in some of these new markets. And they're basically like, look, these are failing left and right. I've got a 10% return rate. I've got to kill this whole project. And you owe me not only for the hardware, but for the oil I put in, right? And, that's the last call you want as a distributor. And so, why we enjoyed so much as a distributor when I was running the distribution business, being a partner with CCELL and now obviously being at CCELL, is that has never been an issue. We've always had top of the industry failure rates, people say less than 1%. I mean, we're talking far less than 1%. And, it's just a non-issue. I mean, you just got to take the issue off the table, right? If a brand is having returns and that ends up affecting their brand reputation and ultimately their P&L, that's going to come back on the supplier at some point. And so we've really negated that issue entirely. It's actually a non-issue. So when people think of CCELL, that's something that never gets brought up, is this idea of, is this product going to have, going to fail and going to tarnish my brand? So we've essentially won that battle to date, and obviously have to be diligent going forward that never happens with products we have. But where we see issues is more so on like with some of these folks getting products that just maybe they don't fail, they don't leak, but they just don't provide that great customer experience. So you're a brand, you put a lot of care into this oil and the flavoring of that oil, and you want the consumer to actually experience what you would expect them to experience. And they might perform, like they might be able to vape and they might get high, but they're not getting the full experience of what that product should be providing. And so they may then go somewhere else, right? They're not going to say, hey, this brand, the product cut out on me or return it, so to speak, but they're just going to buy something different and they don't know any better, right? That's the thing. And that could be happening on a batch by batch or device by device basis. And so sometimes the brands don't even necessarily know that. Like, okay, well, why isn't our sales growing? And it's like, oh, people don't like the product, but it's like, is it the product? Is your oil? Do you need to go back to your lab and fix it? Or is it your hardware? And a lot of times that data is, again, there's a lot of, in this industry, a lot of different points along the supply chain. That dialogue directly with the consumer is not happening as well as it does happen in other industries. So this is an important dynamic for brands to be aware of. It's something that hopefully consumers could become aware of, but I think it's, obviously going to be more on the radar screen of brands to kind of make sure they're getting that performance. And that's one of the things we highlighted with some of the new technology that we're bringing out, right? So the 3.0 technology is, the most recent, I think, really kind of the next big launch of vape technology since the ceramic core was invented by CCELL back in 2016. This is postless, right? And other factories are producing postless products. So that's not necessarily the innovation itself, but it's in the core itself. And the way that the core is set up, it's a stomata design and it's completely uniform. So what we do see with even our ceramic cores that are made in-house that are best of best, they're still not uniform, right? Because just the nature of the material creates, essentially a unique overlay of where the cavities and holes can be. And of course, that can add some variability. So the fact that these were designed to be specifically uniform, right? It's a game changer. And the fact that it sits down below the core now allows for full drain of the oil. So you don't have the oil getting kind of stuck around the core and the consumer, that bought a 1 gram didn't get the full 1 gram. Here, you're going to get the full amount, right? So that's a good start. But the key piece of this technology is in the heating element. So with this heating element, we can actually make sure that the device stays on track when it comes to heat. So you have obviously a spike in heat as you're starting to vaporize the device. Now, what can happen, especially if somebody's doing a longer hit or a blinker hit, right, is that keep running. And it can actually, once it's actually exponential, right? Because once you heat the oil, the oil gets so hot that it heats up the heating element, and the two work together to now really spike the temperature. And that can be, to a consumer, maybe not even noticeable, just, I don't like the flavor. I'm not getting the flavor. I'm not getting the full spectrum of the terpenes. Whereas with our technology, by being able to ensure the heat rises and then plateaus, and even if you're doing a longer hit, you're not spiking the heat and you're not burning off certain terpenes. That's going to deliver the exact flavor that the brand intended to deliver to the customer. So now at least the customer experience can be based on the oil, if they like it or not this extra variable that a lot of brands maybe don't necessarily always account for.
I think that's really cool. I have a question on how you guys navigate the battery aspect associated with that, right? Because the input is going to be the electricity from the battery. So is there internal conversations where you guys were like, we don't want to sell cartridges without batteries anymore because that's a variable you can't control, and all of those things you just mentioned in terms of it's kind of your neck on the line if a brand takes a hit. So how did that conversation kind of progress in terms of continuing to just sell the vape cartridge without hardware?
Yeah, that's a good point. And look, there is a trend in the industry, as you guys know, toward more of these all-in-one devices, right? So the all-in-one devices and the designs of them being more, sort of boxy, and these types of things are cool. It's what we've seen on the nicotine side, right, with the elf bars and these types of products. So it's no surprise that the cannabis consumers gravitating toward those. So obviously now you're controlling the whole system, right? It's all in one. On the cartridge side, which is still a very big part of the market, and the 510 thread specifically, right? That's going to be more universal. Of course, we do sell batteries. We do recommend our batteries. But the key is in the design, like you said, making sure that, we know these products are going to be used with other batteries, and we want them to still have that same level of performance. And so, making sure that if somebody puts on a cheaper battery, that they're still going to get a good hit, get a good plume, that's key. Now, in terms of our technology here, where you're talking about the temperature not spiking, even a lower quality battery, obviously, you're going to have more issues with a souped up battery, but our technology prevents that. So look, it's not perfect, right? We would prefer obviously using our batteries, but we've got it pretty darn good to where customer experience is going to be consistent no matter what battery they use. And so, yeah, it's a good point to bring up. And again, another, I think, point that, if you're a brand, you got to worry about, right? It's you can sell the consumer that your product, you got it built, you got it dealt, you got instructions on there, but they could buy the wrong battery and then not have good experience with your brand. So it's a factor and something everyone needs to be aware of.
There's lines of responsibility, and then there's this massive gray area of okay, whose fault is it? Consumer, brand, hardware, device, and it all kind of gets blended together. Has CCELL looked into or has considered investing in a supply chain in order to try to stabilize the oil agreement? It's just maybe some technology there in order to ensure that when it gets to the next step that it's hit certain QA/QCs?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think we talked a little bit about some of the investments we're making in the, essentially the filling, right? And this is the supply chain that's critical because, as you know, in the cannabis industry, costs are very important, and people have down-traded hardware. It's hey, we know CCELL's the best, but, we'll take the second best or third best because it works, almost as good, and it's, significantly cheaper, right? And so one of the things that we're doing is making investments in bringing our U.S. infrastructure, bringing product stateside, so that we can get the costs lower and be more competitive on costs, because we know that that's important. And so we want people to have the best product, but also at a great price. So there's not this desire to trade down simply over cost, right? So that's one of the things that we're solving there. But essentially actually I forget the question that I was going to answer, was the one on the tangent there was Could you repeat that last part?
Sure. It was more about like the supply chain aspect, like specifically on the extraction side. Does your team invest in technology?
Where I was going with that was the automation on the fulfillment. So this is something we saw a lot of, as a distributor. We ran this a lot. It was, this isn't working. I'm having issues with your hardware. And seriously, 9.8 out of 10 times, our guy, actually, the guy we used at Cush, his name's Jeremiah Howard. He's actually at CCELL now. So he's one of our guys at CCELL. He was my guy back then. We get him out there, right? And we had a few guys that were really good, but we bring the team out, and it was almost always a filling issue, right? It was almost always a filling issue. And we've resolved that, right? And now what CCELL's done, which is great, again, having that bigger budget is nice. As a distributor, we had a couple guys, but now we've got a full team here at CCELL. We've got this whole tech team, and they are mobile, so they will go on site, and they'll make sure that they're helping with the filling process, because that's an important element into getting the overall consumer experience right. Now, the investments we're making, and we've talked about it a little bit, is actually in bringing automated technology to do this, to make it obviously foolproof, so make sure it works every time, but to lower costs for brands ultimately. Now, this can be done through co-packers, and it can also be done directly with vertically integrated operators, especially like MSOs. And so a lot of them, again, it's not the highest thing on their list to spend their money on, right? They're going to spend their money on getting into new markets, opening up new retail stores, investing in new products. But when it comes to investing in the automation behind your filling, it's lower on the list, and everyone's tight on cash. So CCELL has budget. Great, we'll do it, right? We have to be experts in technology and automation. We do a lot of automation at our factories. Let us figure out how to help you fill this in the most efficient manner. And so we never want to compete with our customers. We want to enhance their ability to be more competitive in the marketplace. And so we've got a little test facility set up here in California where we're working on it, doing some filling for people. And this is really to learn and perfect. But if you're a larger co-packer, a larger vertically integrated operator, we'll work directly with you to help enhance your production facility to obviously fill our products, right? We want our products going through those machines, but we want them being the most efficient. And that's going to overall lower your costs, right? So even if you're paying slightly more for a higher quality CCELL product, you're able to fill those and cap those at a lower rate. And so your overall all-in cost is competitive with the marketplace.
So the value, though, right, is directly CCELL gets to sell their product, but then upstream and downstream also has added value for the customers, because then they know the consumer gets a good experience. They continue to flip the products. And then this failure point that happens internally, which is probably a bigger one than most want to admit, it gets eliminated. Now you've got kind of like a continuity across the edge, which is massive advantage when compared to probably some of your peers.
Boom. We're going to, I think, clip that, and we're going to put that on our website as a marketing piece, because you said it exactly correct. And that's what we aim to do here. And again, it's we think production all the way to consumption, right? And so where are the variables in between? We can perfect the hardware, we can perfect the technology, we can perfect the pour now. We can actually make that perfect. Incredible. But if you're not doing the other parts, right, you could still lead to that bad consumer outcome. So we're focused on it all. And some of our customers really get it, and they're leaning in to the partnerships, some of the bigger brands. And so I'm curious to see, just as a, industry OG, I guess, right, somebody that's seen a lot of these brands and been in the market for a long time, and a consumer, kind of how these brands really utilize partnership with CCELL to win in the marketplace. I'd like to see success there, and it really validate the investments we're making.
Tariffs. Talk to us about that perspective, obviously with the new president coming in and the tariffs being a big element and headquarters in China. How does your team think about that? And then is it 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, 10 months? How are you game planning for this?
Yeah. Look, it's an interesting time. We've got a lot of change at the political helm with Trump coming back into office. And, everything is up in the air, right? I don't think any investment is safe. I was talking to some of my friends in packaging. It's like, what do? You don't want, okay, I'm going to build a factory in Mexico, or I'm going to build a factory. That could be next, right? That could get the tariff in. The safest thing right now is obviously making investments in the U.S. Currently, it just doesn't pencil to produce these products in the U.S. You got the whole component supply chain too, right? Because these components are coming from Asia, right? And so everyone needs the same components. And that's why the production of these devices are all done over in Asia, right? And so I think the biggest thing, and this is one of the other things about CCELL making the investments here in the U.S. and part of why I came on board is to help make sure that we're set up here in the U.S. to be more nimble. We're obviously a very big company, probably actually the biggest company in the cannabis industry. I can't think of anyone bigger. I mean, Scott's because they're combined, but I heard, now they're spinning out their cannabis. So big companies are slower, right? It's harder to turn the big ship, right, than the little watercraft, right? And so we recognize we're in cannabis. This is one of the fastest industries and most nimble and sort of agile industries there is. So making the investments and setting CCELL up here in the U.S., bringing the resources here to the U.S., bringing the inventory here to the U.S., bringing the R&D here to the U.S., all of those things are going to help us be more nimble. And so when we think about tariff or political policy, the same logic needs to apply. We need to be prepared, right? And so what I love of what we've already done is we've made investments in Indonesia, made investments in other parts of Asia to diversify because we know China is sort of the big target when it comes to some of these tariffs. We just saw another 10% tariff being implemented. And, for us, we have the balance sheet. We can absorb some of these impacts, but for our customers, it's much more challenging, right? So we have to think through how do we minimize the impact to our customer. One of the big things that we unlock by being able to set up our own infrastructure here in the U.S. is advantages when it comes to tariff importing. Yes, we're still paying tariffs, but we can pay them at the manufacturer basis, right? All of our competition is essentially distributors, right? They are buying from existing factories that they don't own. And so they don't have that advantage, right? They can, underreport their tariffs, right? But they risk getting caught, but they can't bring in the tariffs at the manufacturing basis, like the component basis, because they're not doing the assembly here. But we produce those products ourselves, so we can actually import them at our cost, right? And so even if there is a tariff, it's going to end up being a lower amount, right? So those are the different ways that you can plan, right? Kind of get ahead of the curve. But there's obviously an unknown component to what's going to happen here. And so that's going to be something we have to address as the change comes. I do know that the new administration is very pro-American business. I think that, all of us have been very disenchanted with the previous administrations and the lack of progress on legalization for our industry. I'm hoping for big change. We're here recording this, I think, less than 24 hours before Robert F. Kennedy becomes the new head of HHS. I think that's a game changer, personally. I think, obviously he's pro-cannabis. He mentioned when he was running for president that he would legalize it, right? And so with this position that he's going into, I expect some very positive change here at some point. Obviously, it's not the highest unintended thing on their priority list. But I think it will happen. So we got to prepare for that. I think the industry has to mobilize. I like to see what was happening where the industry groups have all sort of banded together under one banner now to push the common message to DC. So we need that big unlock there. And then that can help us all the way up the supply chain, right? Because when the federal government starts to look at the cannabis industry as an American industry, putting unnecessary costs into the supply chain all the way back to the vaping, that becomes detrimental to American consumers and American jobs, right? So I think in a perfect world, we can sort of get this resolved here over the next few years with a common sense approach. And I think the new administration is trying to make sure that they remain common sense on a lot of these issues. Now, you got legacy politicians that are totally against cannabis on both sides of the aisle, but a lot of them are on the Republican side of the aisle. So we've got to navigate that. But I think with the Trump administration, some of the appointees, this isn't a very legacy group, right? These are new folks that I think are thinking about things in a more common sense way. And one of the things that I think has always been the case is cannabis has been less of a partisan issue and more of a generational issue. And so just having younger people coming into positions of power, I think, is positive. So again, it's a long-winded answer of kind of the macro political dynamics that involve tariffs and supply chain, but I think they're all kind of interconnected. So if we look at cannabis as an American industry, the next great American industry, which it is just look at the data, right? I mean, it's $40 billion now across legal, regulated cannabis and legal hemp. I think there's an opportunity to combine the industry under a common sense legal structure. There's no sense in us fighting two different sides of this industry. I think somebody that looks at this like RFK possibly could could say, hey, let's put this together. Let's put common sense regulations that are going to significantly deregulate. I think we're overregulated on one side, right? We're underregulated on the other side, on the hemp side. Put those together with common sense regulations. Show that we're going to create a great American industry with American jobs, and we're going to benefit consumers, veterans, right, who need this product. It could be a recipe for success that ultimately solves some of these uncertainties on the supply chain too. Hope that's my goal, and I want to manifest that. So I'm bringing it here to you guys and getting it out to the world.
One of the elements that RFK definitely wants is more research. So given the R&D budgets that your team's put in as one of the leaders of maybe the largest company, like you said, is your team also taking the standpoint of ensuring the safety of the technology and making sure the consumers who are vaping have all those elements? Is there research there that you can share or plans for those elements?
Yeah, great question. We're very much have been focused on doing that for the consumer, right? And I think the reality is the government hasn't been too interested in cooperating with the private sector to accomplish that for the greater good. And so that hopefully will change. We'd certainly be open to shifting our resources to align with that initiative and being a part of the solution that could unlock value for our entire industry. And we have the budget to do that. And that's, again, kind of all the same theme, right? Part of CCELL 2.0, what we're doing here is aligning more with the industry. I think traditionally, and what you see across is like these vape companies are essentially buying vape products produced from Chinese factories that are totally disconnected from the cannabis industry. And of course, there's good companies here that are, essentially distributors that, have branded themselves as vape companies that are deep in the cannabis industry, but it's not connected. Their supply chain is disconnected from the cannabis industry. It's just a widget, right? So I think have the opportunity here at CCELL to be the first company to do end-to-end. We're highly technical and involved in the manufacturing itself. We produce a lot of our own components, including the ceramic cores. And now we're bringing boots on the ground and research and development on the ground here in the United States. So connecting that supply chain, and then with that, I think very unique, standpoint, sort of the how we're able to look at the industry with that perspective, that could bring a lot of value to an inquisitive federal government that wants to get it right. The federal government changes their attitude to, hey, we just want to ban this because it's bad or it goes against big pharma, to what can this really do for veterans that are suffering from PTSD, for people that are on SSRIs that switch to. I think that perspective is going to change, and who's in a better position to sort of help support that from an R&D standpoint, given our connection end to end. And again, we're only on the vape side, so there's so much cannabis science, right, that needs to be done. But I love thinking about a world where we're investigating that as a country and asking the right questions, and turning plant medicine from the boogeyman into something that can be very positive and actually get people off of hard pharma drugs. Gosh, this could be really what we've all kind of been waiting for many, many years now.
I think it's really wild that it's never spoken about, that the existence of like e-juice and nicotine vaporizers is solely as like a safer alternative to smoking cigarettes, right? And like my mom smoked cigarettes her whole life. She moved to nicotine vapes, way healthier human being, right? Like she looks healthier, she has a better life. And like that conversation never happened in cannabis, right? Like we just forget the fact that like there's a bunch of people still smoking flower, and a safer way to inhale your medicine is via a vape pen, right? So like, has there ever been any conversations in CCELL to kind of like fund a study showing that exact benefit from like not lighting something on fire and inhaling a flaming plant versus like inhaling vapor at a specific temperature that's controlled in this kind of a technology platform?
Yeah, look, you mentioned a great point, the adjacency to what's happening here in the US on the vaping side on nicotine, right? And it's actually twofold, right? Because on one hand, there is this PMTA process that a lot of the larger companies have gone through, which requires extensive research, and they're actually looking at the safety of these products. And unfortunately, that's been undermined and undercut by this illegal nicotine vape market with everything like these elf bars and all this stuff that comes over. It's completely unregulated, completely untested, ends up in the smoke shops and head shops. And this stuff that these, kids, unfortunately, right, a lot of them are younger, are, sucking down. We don't know what's in it. And we don't know if that's healthy or not. So I think it's a great question. More research needs to be done on the nicotine side in terms of the additives that are added. And nobody's talking about it on the cannabis front. And part of it's, we're not even talking about, what is the, what is the issue with combustion of flower, right? Because it might not be the same as nicotine. So let's start there. Then we can go, okay, vaping is obviously a solution that is working for nicotine. We see it in like UK and other countries. They've done real research on this. But what do we want in the vapes? What do we want to make sure are out of the vapes? Stuff like PG, polyglycol. That's something that the industry luckily has moved away from. We're using terpenes, and so studying the terpenes, right? And we know some of these companies are making efforts to do that, but we need to look at it holistically. The other thing that I think it could be big, right, is when we think about legalization and public consumption, right? That's, nicotine, right? That was a big issue. People smoking cigarettes, we used to do it in planes and restaurants, and that all got banned, and I think that's been a pushback against cannabis is the smell. And you're in New York where you're allowed to smoke on the street, right? And people have used that against our industry. So vaping is another way to reduce that. I know, we saw an uptick in consumption when the pandemic hit because people were stuck indoors. They weren't allowed to go outside and, they have kids or, they don't want to be, blowing up their whole house. So people love the vape product for multiple reasons. I think we need to do more research on the safety and how do we make it the safest it can possibly be? We know there's already nicotine data that can suggest it's safer than combustion, right? But what about the additives? What about all the other components? And great point. And look, so much to be done, and that's what makes it exciting. And education of the consumer is a big piece. The consumers are all relatively new, right? And this is a new category. I mean, vaping cannabis has barely been around 10 years. So a lot to do, and it's still gaining in popularity. So definitely want to do more safety testing when something's this popular and only growing bigger and bigger, right?
I love it. Hard pivot. Last question. What question do you wish more people asked you?
Look, I think we talked about a lot of it. I mean, I think the biggest one, from a CCELL standpoint, is people aren't asking deep enough questions about the supply chain, right? About the components that go into the devices, who's producing the devices, and people are buying brands, and probably the majority of consumers are oblivious to even what's in the hardware, right? Like they don't even think about the hardware being different, right? Just like, if you buy an Apple computer, you might not necessarily think about whose chip was in that computer, right? But that's because Apple is such a trusted brand, they're going to buy quality chips, right? And we're not there yet in cannabis, right? These brands haven't established the level of trust that someone like Apple has with their consumer. And so consumers, in my mind, should be asking those questions, right? So I think that's one thing. The other thing, and we also talked about, was I think, not enough people are talking about what's possible here with this new administration. I think, there's been too much of this idea that Republicans are bad for cannabis. And, look, I was on that same line of thinking until we sat through 4 years of the Democrats literally doing nothing, right? And gaslighting us, pretending they were going to do stuff. So I think opening up the dialogue around RFK, this is very unique opportunity. We've never had anyone like this in HHS, which is arguably the most important position. This is stuff that the industry should be talking more about. And I do see, some people, but there's more of this, I think tension between people. Well, there's obviously a group of people that don't want to support Trump and are willing to continue to kind of buy into these old paradigms about Republicans are bad for cannabis. Look, let's shake that. Let's see what can be done here with this new administration. I'm always an optimist. So no matter who's in power, I'm going to be optimistic. But, there's no reason not to be optimistic when we've sat this long and got nothing done. The time could be now, certainly within the next few years. So I think that's a topic we need to be talking about. And, the other thing which we hit on was the R&D, right? And, where are these companies investing? And I think, unfortunately, right, a lot of that's hamstrung because of the capital situation. But I think that as that improves, and we need federal reform for that to improve, that's going to be a big topic of where does this industry go next? We see nicotine on a global level moving to this heat-not-burn, right? Moving to highly regulated vaporization, and is that what's going to be next for our cannabis industry? And that's going to be an exciting topic, but I think maybe a little more challenging in today's environment to have that conversation.
I love it. And with that, Nick, for our listeners, they want to get in touch, they want to learn more about CCELL, where can they find you?
Well, our website is a great resource. So CCELL.com, check it out. We actually revamped the website. We also are going to be continuing to be active in the cannabis community. So you'll see us in we're going to be part of different cannabis publications, magazines. We're at trade shows. So, we mentioned the big 3.0 launch at MJ BizCon. We're going to be at Benzinga, so we want to, part of putting the boots on the ground here is investing more in the cannabis community, Hall of Flowers, these types of things. And then I'm the corporate relations director. So I'm the guy that's going to be talking about CCELL at a lot of these industry events. And I appreciate the platform you guys have provided us here. This is a great podcast to be showcased on, and expect more of this from us. So, look, we're going to put information out on social media. We're going to put information on our website. But we want to, we don't want to make everyone come to us. We want to come to you. So we want to be out there where the cannabis consumers are consuming content, and start to make sure people are getting more aware of, behind the scenes on the supply chain, right? And I think this will be a good episode to highlight. And I think we did the deep dive here that is really what the message we've been trying to get out. It's only February, so we're starting off the year really well.
I love it. We'll link it up in the show notes. Thanks for taking the time. This was a lot of fun.
All right, guys. Thank you so much.